The massive timber rattlesnake struck without warning, its fangs sinking deep into 8-year-old Tommy Morrison's calf as he reached beneath the weathered boulder to retrieve what looked like an Indian arrowhead. The serpent, nearly 6 feet long with diamond patterns that seemed to shimmer in the harsh Colorado sun, coiled back defensively while its distinctive rattle filled the air with a menacing buzz that would haunt Jake Morrison's nightmares for years to come. Tommy's scream pierced the morning stillness as he collapsed beside Willow Creek, clutching his leg where 2 puncture wounds were already beginning to swell and turn an ominous shade of purple. Jake dropped to his knees beside his twin brother, his hands trembling as he tried to remember everything their father had taught them about snakebites during their long journey west to Uncle Samuel's ranch in the Colorado Territory. The boys had been playing near the creek while their uncle conducted mysterious business with a stranger who had arrived at dawn riding a magnificent black stallion with silver-trimmed tack. The man wore a long duster coat despite the sweltering August heat of 1887, and his face remained hidden beneath the wide brim of a hat that looked like it had seen countless dusty trails and perhaps more than its share of trouble. "Jake, I can't feel my leg anymore," Tommy whispered weakly, his face growing pale as beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the morning chill that still lingered in the canyon shadows. The venom from the timber rattlesnake was already beginning its deadly work, attacking Tommy's nervous system while simultaneously destroying blood vessels and tissue around the bite site. Jake had heard the terrifying campfire stories about how such serpents could kill a grown man within hours, and his brother was just a small boy weighing barely 60 pounds after their difficult journey across the harsh frontier landscape. The sound of gunfire suddenly echoed across the canyon, sharp cracks that seemed to come from the direction of Uncle Samuel's ranch house. Jake's heart pounded as he heard shouting voices and the thunder of horses galloping away at full speed, but Tommy's weakening condition demanded his immediate attention. His brother's breathing was becoming labored, and the wound was swelling rapidly as the hemotoxic venom spread through his bloodstream, causing internal bleeding and tissue destruction that would leave permanent damage if not treated quickly. As Jake tore strips from his own shirt to create a makeshift tourniquet, he noticed something strange about the morning's events that made his skin crawl with unease. Uncle Samuel had been acting peculiar for the past week, often riding out before dawn and returning after dark with a haunted expression that spoke of troubles far beyond managing cattle and horses. The mysterious stranger's arrival seemed to be connected to whatever was troubling their uncle, and now Tommy's life hung in the balance while violent events unfolded at the ranch house. 2 riders emerged from the morning haze like phantoms materialized from the desert heat, their horses lathered with sweat as if they had been riding hard across the rugged terrain for hours. The first rider was a woman with steel-gray hair tied back in a practical bun, her weathered hands gripping the reins with the confidence of someone who had spent decades in the saddle facing dangers that would break lesser souls. She wore men's clothing, leather chaps over dark trousers, and a gun belt that hung low on her hip in the manner of someone who knew how to use it and had done so many times before. The second rider appeared to be a Mexican vaquero with a distinctive scar running from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, a mark that suggested violent encounters in his past. His horse, a magnificent paint stallion with intelligent eyes, danced nervously as he dismounted with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. Both strangers moved with purposeful efficiency that spoke of experience handling crisis situations, and Jake noticed their eyes constantly scanned the surrounding landscape as if expecting danger to emerge from any shadow or rock formation. "Rattlesnake bite," the woman stated matter-of-factly after a single glance at Tommy's condition, her voice carrying a slight accent that Jake couldn't quite place but suggested education and refinement far beyond typical frontier settlers. "How long ago?" she asked while pulling a leather satchel from her saddlebags that appeared to contain sophisticated medical supplies including glass vials filled with different colored liquids and surgical instruments wrapped in clean cloth. "Maybe 15 minutes, Jake replied, his voice cracking with emotion as he watched his brother's condition deteriorate. "The snake's still under that rock, and Tommy said he can't feel his leg. He's having trouble breathing too." The Mexican vaquero moved toward the boulder where the rattlesnake remained coiled, speaking in rapid Spanish while keeping his hand near his weapon, his movements deliberate and cautious in a way that suggested extensive experience with dangerous wildlife. The woman knelt beside Tommy with practiced skill, her fingers finding his pulse point while her other hand checked his pupils for signs of neurological damage. "Miguel, we need to move him immediately," she called to her companion in a tone that brooked no argument. "The venom's spreading faster than I expected, and he's showing signs of severe systemic envenomation. His pulse is weak and irregular, and his breathing is becoming increasingly shallow. As she began preparing what appeared to be an injection drawn from one of her mysterious glass vials, Jake noticed details about these strangers that seemed highly unusual for typical ranch folk encountered on the frontier. The woman's hands, while calloused from outdoor work, bore no wedding ring and showed signs of delicate tasks beyond simple ranch labor. Her clothing, though practical for riding, was crafted from higher quality materials than most frontier settlers could afford, and her boots were made from fine leather with silver buckles that caught the morning sunlight. Miguel's equipment was even more intriguing, as his gun belt held not one but two matching Colt revolvers with ivory handles carved in intricate patterns, and his spurs were crafted from silver with engravings that suggested Mexican craftsmanship of the highest quality. Most puzzling of all was the way both strangers kept glancing toward the ranch house where the column of smoke was growing thicker, their expressions suggesting they knew exactly what had transpired during the morning's violent encounter. "Who are you people?" Jake asked as the woman carefully administered the injection to his unconscious brother, whose breathing had become so shallow that Jake could barely detect the rise and fall of his chest. The swelling in Tommy's leg had spread past his knee, and dark discoloration was creeping up toward his thigh as the venom continued its destructive work on his tissue and circulatory system. "Names aren't important right now, boy," she replied without looking up from her work, her hands moving with surgical precision as she examined the bite wound and cleaned it with a pungent antiseptic that made Jake's eyes water. "What matters is getting your brother proper medical attention and figuring out why Samuel Morrison sent word about trouble heading to his ranch." Her words sent ice through Jake's veins as he realized these strangers not only knew his uncle's full name but had apparently been expecting some kind of danger. Miguel returned from dealing with the rattlesnake, his expression grim as he reported to the woman in Spanish. Jake caught only fragments of their conversation, but the urgent tone and the way Miguel kept looking toward the eastern horizon where black smoke was now billowing into the clear sky suggested the situation at Uncle Samuel's ranch had taken a turn for the worse. "We're heading to the old line shack in Devil's Canyon," the woman announced while carefully lifting Tommy's limp form. "It's the only place within reasonable distance that has the medical supplies I need to counteract this amount of venom, and it offers a defensive position if we're being pursued." Her words revealed a level of preparedness and knowledge about the local terrain that went far beyond casual familiarity, suggesting these mysterious rescuers had been operating in the area for some time. As Miguel helped Jake mount behind him on the paint stallion, the boy caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. In the distance, silhouetted against the morning sky, three riders sat motionless on a ridge overlooking the canyon, their forms dark and ominous against the brightening horizon. They appeared to be watching the rescue operation unfold, but something about their stillness and positioning suggested malevolent intent rather than mere curiosity about the commotion below. The journey to Devil's Canyon proved more treacherous than Jake had imagined as Miguel's paint stallion navigated the narrow rocky trail that wound between towering sandstone formations and deep ravines carved by centuries of flash floods. Tommy remained unconscious in the woman's arms as her mare picked its way carefully along the precarious path, her hooves sending loose stones cascading into the depths below with echoing clatters that seemed to announce their passage to anyone within miles. The mysterious woman, who had finally introduced herself only as Catherine, maintained a steady stream of medical observations about Tommy's condition while simultaneously scanning the surrounding cliffs for signs of pursuit. The three riders who had been watching from the ridge were no longer visible, but Miguel occasionally gestured toward distant dust clouds that suggested they were being tracked by someone who knew these canyons as well as they did. Catherine explained that the timber rattlesnake's venom contained a complex mixture of hemotoxic and neurotoxic compounds that were rapidly breaking down Tommy's blood vessels and attacking his nervous system, causing the alarming swelling and respiratory depression they had witnessed. Without proper medical intervention using techniques that went far beyond typical frontier remedies, the boy would likely succumb within the next few hours as his cardiovascular system collapsed under the assault. As they descended deeper into Devil's Canyon, Jake noticed that Catherine carried herself with an authority that spoke of extensive medical training, far beyond what any typical frontier woman would possess. Her saddlebags contained not only sophisticated glass vials and surgical instruments, but also what appeared to be a primitive syringe and several bottles of chemicals that she identified as potassium permanganate solution and mercury bichloride, compounds that were typically only available to trained physicians in major cities. Her knowledge of snake venom treatment suggested formal medical education, yet her familiarity with weapons and the harsh realities of frontier life indicated experiences that no respectable lady doctor would have encountered. Miguel's background remained equally mysterious as he guided them through a series of hidden trails that seemed to exist only in his memory, paths that had clearly been used for clandestine purposes over many years. His scarred face and the way he constantly watched their back trail suggested a man who had lived by violence and expected it to find him again, while his expensive equipment and obvious education indicated connections to wealth and power that extended far beyond simple vaquero work. The silver engravings on his spurs depicted symbols that Jake recognized from his father's stories about Mexican revolutionaries and the complex political struggles that had torn that country apart for decades. The line shack finally came into view as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks, a sturdy structure built from local timber and stone that had been carefully positioned to take advantage of natural defensive features. The building sat on a small plateau surrounded by steep cliffs on three sides, with the only approach being the narrow trail they had just navigated, making it virtually impossible for anyone to attack without exposing themselves to defensive fire from the cabin's strategic gun ports. Catherine explained that the shack had been built not as a simple shelter for ranch hands, but as a fortified position designed to withstand siege conditions during the ongoing conflicts between cattle ranchers, homesteaders, and various outlaw groups that plagued the Colorado Territory. Inside the surprisingly well-equipped cabin, Catherine immediately set to work treating Tommy's critical condition using methods that Jake found both fascinating and terrifying. She prepared what she called Bibrin's antidote, a mixture of bromine, mercury bichloride, and potassium iodide that had been developed by French scientists specifically for treating venomous snake bites, though she admitted the remedy's effectiveness remained questionable and carried significant risks of its own. The treatment required her to make precise incisions around the bite wound to allow drainage of contaminated blood and tissue, followed by careful irrigation with the chemical solutions and the application of heated implements to cauterize damaged areas. While Catherine worked with surgical precision to save Tommy's life, Miguel secured the cabin and prepared defensive positions that suggested they expected imminent attack from hostile forces. He explained to Jake that Uncle Samuel had been involved in a complex web of cattle rustling, land disputes, and territorial politics that had finally caught up with him in the form of a vendetta involving powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to eliminate anyone who could testify about their illegal activities. The mysterious stranger who had visited the ranch that morning was apparently a representative of these enemies, delivering an ultimatum that Samuel had refused to accept, resulting in the violence they had witnessed. As darkness fell over Devil's Canyon, the sound of approaching horses echoed off the rock walls, confirming their worst fears about being pursued by dangerous men who had no intention of allowing any witnesses to escape alive. Miguel counted at least 6 riders approaching along the trail, armed with rifles and moving with the coordinated precision of experienced killers rather than simple ranch hands seeking to recover stolen property. Catherine paused in her medical work long enough to check her own weapons, revealing a small pistol concealed in her medical bag and demonstrating familiarity with its use that suggested considerable experience in violent situations. Tommy's condition remained critical as his body fought both the snake venom and the aggressive medical treatment designed to counteract it, his breathing shallow and irregular while his pulse fluctuated wildly between dangerously slow and alarmingly rapid. Catherine administered carefully measured doses of whiskey as a cardiac stimulant while simultaneously applying heated branding irons to cauterize areas where the venom had caused extensive tissue necrosis, creating an atmosphere in the cabin that combined the acrid smoke of burning flesh with the pungent chemicals of her medical compounds. Jake watched in horrified fascination as she worked to save his brother's life, understanding for the first time the brutal realities of frontier medicine where survival often depended on enduring treatments that seemed almost as dangerous as the original injury. The attacking riders announced their arrival with rifle shots that shattered the cabin's single window and sent splinters of wood flying across the interior, followed by shouted demands for the surrender of anyone inside who might have witnessed the morning's events at the Morrison Ranch. Miguel responded with carefully aimed return fire from the gun ports, his twin Colt revolver speaking with deadly accuracy that sent at least one attacker tumbling from his saddle with a scream of pain and rage. Catherine continued her medical work despite the gunfire, her hands steady as she administered another injection to Tommy while explaining to Jake that they were trapped in a situation where escape seemed impossible but surrender would certainly mean death for all of them. The siege continued through the long night as the attackers attempted various strategies to flush out the defenders, including setting fire to brush near the cabin in hopes of smoking them out and rolling boulders down the cliffs to damage the structure's roof and walls. Miguel's defensive preparations proved their worth as the cabin's strategic position allowed him to hold off superior numbers while conserving ammunition, though he admitted to Jake that their supplies were limited and they could not withstand a prolonged siege without eventually running out of resources. Catherine worked tirelessly to stabilize Tommy's condition, using techniques that included the controversial injection of small amounts of strychnine as a powerful cardiac stimulant, a treatment that carried enormous risks but represented their only hope of counteracting the snake venom's effects on his nervous system. As dawn approached and Tommy's condition began to show signs of gradual improvement, the attackers made their final desperate assault on the cabin, rushing the defensive position in hopes of overwhelming the defenders through sheer numbers and aggressive tactics. Miguel's marksmanship proved decisive as he systematically eliminated the most dangerous threats while Catherine provided supporting fire with her concealed pistol, demonstrating shooting skills that would have impressed professional gunfighters. The battle's climax came when the apparent leader of the attacking force, a man Jake recognized as the mysterious stranger from that morning, attempted to breach the cabin's barricaded door only to meet his end at the business end of Miguel's smoking Colt. In the aftermath of the violent encounter, as Jake helped Catherine continue treating Tommy's slowly improving condition, she finally revealed the truth about their connection to Uncle Samuel and the events that had led to this deadly confrontation. Samuel Morrison had been secretly working as an informant for federal marshals investigating a complex criminal organization that controlled cattle rustling operations across multiple territories, using his ranch as a cover for gathering information about their activities and reporting their movements to law enforcement authorities. Catherine identified herself as Dr. Catherine Mitchell, a physician who had been working undercover with the marshals to provide medical care to their operatives and gather intelligence about criminal activities in remote frontier areas. Miguel's true identity proved equally surprising as he revealed himself to be Captain Miguel Vasquez, a former officer in the Mexican army who had fled his homeland after political upheavals made his position untenable, subsequently finding employment with American law enforcement agencies that valued his military experience and intimate knowledge of border territories. The line shack served as a secret supply depot and communication point for federal operations in the region, equipped with medical supplies, weapons, and other resources necessary for extended undercover missions in hostile territory. Uncle Samuel's death at the hands of the criminal organization had been the culmination of months of investigation that had finally identified the key figures responsible for terrorizing honest ranchers and homesteaders across the Colorado Territory. As Tommy finally regained consciousness and began showing signs of recovery from his ordeal, Jake realized that their family's simple visit to Uncle Samuel's ranch had inadvertently placed them in the middle of a conflict between federal law enforcement and dangerous criminals who would kill anyone who threatened their operations. The heroic rescue that had saved Tommy's life was actually part of a larger struggle to bring justice to a lawless region where honest people lived in constant fear of violence and intimidation from organized criminal gangs. Dr. Mitchell explained that Tommy's recovery would require weeks of careful medical attention to fully counteract the snake venom's effects, but his youth and strong constitution had helped him survive both the envenomation and the harsh treatment necessary to save his life. The sun rose over Devil's Canyon to reveal a scene of devastating carnage where the bodies of their attackers lay scattered around the defensive position, silent testimony to the deadly skills of Dr. Mitchell and Captain Vasquez in protecting innocent lives from criminal violence. Jake understood that this experience had changed his family forever, transforming what should have been a simple family visit into a violent encounter with the harsh realities of frontier justice. As they prepared to transport Tommy to proper medical facilities where his recovery could continue under safer conditions, Dr. Mitchell promised that the federal marshals would ensure their protection while the surviving members of the criminal organization were hunted down and brought to justice for their crimes against honest settlers throughout the territory. 3 weeks had passed since the violent confrontation at Devil's Canyon, and Tommy Morrison sat propped against the wooden headboard of a bed in the territorial marshal's office in Silver Creek, Colorado, his leg still bearing the angry scars from the timber rattlesnake's fangs but finally showing signs of proper healing under Dr. Mitchell's continued care. The boy's recovery had been slower and more complicated than anyone had anticipated, with recurring bouts of fever and weakness that suggested the venom had caused permanent damage to his circulatory system that would plague him for years to come. Jake remained constantly at his brother's side, haunted by nightmares of that terrible morning when everything in their young lives had changed forever, transforming them from innocent children into witnesses to the brutal realities of frontier justice. Marshal James Crawford, a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much violence over his long career in law enforcement, sat behind his cluttered desk reviewing the extensive reports that Dr. Mitchell and Captain Vasquez had submitted detailing their investigation into the criminal organization that had terrorized the Colorado Territory for nearly 2 years. The evidence they had gathered during their undercover operation painted a disturbing picture of corruption that extended far beyond simple cattle rustling, involving territorial officials, railroad executives, and even federal appointees who had been systematically exploiting honest settlers while enriching themselves through illegal land schemes and fraudulent mining claims. Uncle Samuel's death had been only one of dozens of murders committed by the organization to silence anyone who threatened to expose their activities, with victims including newspaper editors, territorial judges, and federal investigators who had gotten too close to uncovering the truth about their operations. Dr. Mitchell explained that Samuel Morrison had been recruited as an informant after federal marshals discovered his extensive knowledge of local ranching operations and his reputation for absolute honesty in business dealings, qualities that made him invaluable for gathering intelligence about suspicious activities in remote areas where conventional law enforcement had little presence or authority. The mysterious stranger who had visited the Morrison ranch that final morning had been identified as William "Black Bill" Henderson, a notorious killer who had earned his reputation working for various criminal enterprises throughout the frontier territories before being recruited by the organization to eliminate threats to their operations. Henderson's death during the siege at Devil's Canyon had been a significant victory for federal law enforcement, as he had been wanted for multiple murders in 3 different territories, and his elimination removed one of the most dangerous threats to honest citizens attempting to build new lives in the American West. Captain Vasquez had spent the intervening weeks tracking down the remaining members of Henderson's gang, using information gathered from their attack on the line shack to identify their base of operations and uncover evidence of their extensive criminal activities. His military background and intimate knowledge of guerrilla warfare tactics had proven invaluable in locating the hidden camps and supply caches that the organization used to support their operations across hundreds of square miles of rugged mountain terrain. The captain's efforts had resulted in the capture of 6 additional gang members and the recovery of stolen cattle, horses, and other property worth thousands of dollars that had been taken from honest ranchers and homesteaders. Dr. Mitchell's medical expertise had not only saved Tommy's life but also provided crucial evidence about the organization's activities through her treatment of wounded gang members who had been captured during various raids and confrontations. Her ability to gain the trust of injured criminals while providing medical care had enabled her to gather intelligence about planned attacks, hidden treasure locations, and the identities of corrupt officials who were secretly supporting the organization's activities. The combination of her medical skills and investigative abilities had made her an invaluable asset to federal law enforcement efforts throughout the territory. As Jake listened to the adults discuss the complex web of criminal activity that had nearly cost his brother's life, he began to understand that their family had been caught up in something much larger and more dangerous than simple frontier lawlessness. The organization that had killed Uncle Samuel represented a systematic attempt to control the development of the American West through violence and corruption, preventing honest settlers from establishing the communities and institutions necessary for civilized society to flourish in the territories. Their criminal activities threatened the very foundation of American expansion and the democratic principles that were supposed to guide the nation's growth across the continent. The full scope of the conspiracy became clear as Marshal Crawford revealed that the investigation had uncovered connections between the territorial organization and similar criminal groups operating in Wyoming, Montana, and New Mexico, suggesting a coordinated effort to control Western development that extended far beyond the Colorado Territory. Railroad companies had been secretly financing some of these groups to prevent competing transportation networks from being established, while mining corporations had used criminal violence to eliminate small prospectors and claim jumpers who threatened their monopolistic control over valuable mineral resources. The corruption extended to the highest levels of territorial government, with appointed officials receiving bribes and kickbacks in exchange for ignoring criminal activities and blocking legitimate law enforcement efforts. Dr. Mitchell explained that the medical supplies and sophisticated equipment she had used to save Tommy's life were part of a larger federal effort to establish proper medical care in frontier regions where doctors were scarce and medical knowledge was often limited to folk remedies and questionable patent medicines. Her work had demonstrated the importance of bringing modern medical techniques to remote areas where injuries and illnesses that would be easily treatable in established cities often proved fatal due to lack of proper care and supplies. The line shack in Devil's Canyon had been equipped not only as a defensive position but as a field hospital capable of handling serious medical emergencies that occurred during law enforcement operations in hostile territory. Captain Vasquez revealed that his true mission extended beyond simple law enforcement to include gathering intelligence about potential foreign threats to American territorial security, as various European powers and Mexican revolutionary groups had shown interest in exploiting the chaos and lawlessness of the frontier regions for their own political purposes. His military experience and linguistic abilities had enabled him to infiltrate criminal organizations that included foreign nationals and gather information about their connections to hostile foreign governments that might threaten American sovereignty in the Western territories. The captain's work had uncovered evidence of foreign agents attempting to incite conflicts between American settlers and Native American tribes as part of broader efforts to destabilize American expansion. The revelation that their family had become involved in such a complex and dangerous situation left Jake feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility of keeping the secrets he had learned while ensuring his brother's continued safety and recovery. Marshal Crawford assured him that federal marshals would provide protection for their family as long as necessary, but also warned that the surviving members of the criminal organization would likely continue seeking revenge against anyone who had witnessed their activities or could testify about their operations. The boys would need to remain vigilant and report any suspicious activities or threats they encountered, as their safety depended on maintaining awareness of potential dangers. As Tommy's strength gradually returned and his medical condition stabilized, Dr. Mitchell began preparing for the next phase of the federal investigation that would require her to establish a new identity and infiltrate another criminal organization operating in the Wyoming Territory. Her success in Colorado had demonstrated the effectiveness of using medical professionals as undercover agents, as their ability to provide essential services made them welcome in communities where conventional law enforcement would be immediately suspect. The doctor's dedication to both healing and justice had inspired Jake with a new understanding of how individual courage and professional skill could be combined to serve the greater good of society. The final revelation came when Marshal Crawford showed the Morrison boys a telegram from Washington containing orders from the federal government to expand the undercover investigation program throughout all Western territories, using the Colorado operation as a model for similar efforts to combat organized crime and corruption across the frontier regions. Uncle Samuel's sacrifice had not been in vain, as his death had provided the evidence necessary to convince federal authorities that systematic criminal activity posed a serious threat to American expansion and required coordinated law enforcement response at the national level. Captain Vasquez announced his intention to continue working with federal marshals to track down the remaining members of the organization and gather evidence about their connections to criminal groups in other territories, a mission that would likely require months of dangerous undercover work in hostile territory. His commitment to justice and his unique qualifications for such dangerous assignments had made him an invaluable asset to federal law enforcement efforts, though the personal cost of such work was evident in the scars he bore and the haunted expression that sometimes crossed his features when he thought no one was watching. As the sun set over Silver Creek and the Morrison boys prepared for their journey back to their family's farm in Kansas, Jake reflected on how their simple visit to Uncle Samuel's ranch had unexpectedly thrust them into the middle of a struggle between the forces of law and order and the criminal elements that sought to control the American frontier through violence and intimidation. Their experience had taught them that heroism often emerged from ordinary people who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances, and that the price of freedom and justice required constant vigilance and courage from citizens willing to stand against those who would exploit the weak and innocent. The memory of Dr. Mitchell's skilled hands working to save Tommy's life and Captain Vasquez's deadly accurate shooting during the siege at Devil's Canyon would remain with Jake forever, reminding him that civilization's advance into the wilderness depended on individuals willing to risk everything to protect others and uphold the principles of justice that defined American society. Their story had become part of the larger narrative of Western expansion, where ordinary families found themselves caught up in events that would determine the future character of the American nation and the values that would guide its development across the continent.